Welcome back to News 19 right here on TV1. We continue our discussion, the post-discussion from the grand jury's decision yesterday not to indict Officer Darren Wilson. Someone just posted this photo on Twitter. It's always interesting, you know, you see different reaction. This was the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in huge bold letters, no charges for Wilson. So we'll pull that up in a second. Let's continue our discussion here. We have Cleo Monago, Lon Victoria Burke, Jeff Johnson. We have Glenn Ivey. Also, we have State Senator Nadal joining us as well. And Yamisha Alcindor, reporter for USA Today, also joins us. Let's get right back to the discussion we had. Jeff, you had a question that you were posing to Lauren and Cleo. Go right ahead.
No, I mean, I think I understand the rage. My question is, what does that have to do with burning up your own stuff? And at what point does your rage allow you to understand that even from a outrage and a symbolism standpoint, burning a police car is different than burning your own stuff?
Well, you cannot expect people who are sitting on all types of rage to have a perfectly delivered rage reaction. When people see a whole canvas of nothing working for them in the midst of a dead body, several dead bodies. I mean, I had conversations with many people in Ferguson where they had a horror story. I mean, I'm talking about a horror story. And so nobody has credibility on the ground when a nationally televised something like what happened with Darren Williams and McCullough happens. They say, here we go again.
And that's a misnomer. You're ignoring the fact that there are young people and young adults on the ground that aren't a part of the establishment, that have been part of these trainings, that have been engaging more than just a core group of people that are part of the establishment.
Jeff, you're talking about,
I am, but even in rage, there is leadership. And so even in rage, there's leadership. And so there is leadership on the ground that is not part of the establishment, that is not in support of burning up the very office of people that have been supportive.
I know
that's
true.
Great. That's great that there's leadership. We understand that. Obviously, the senator is a great example of that. The problem is we haven't gotten results.
That's right.
We get leadership. We get talk.
That's still playing checkers and not chess.
Then we go around. We get no results.
So what's the result out of this?
Conversation after Trayvon.
So what's the result out of this?
Conversation after Trayvon.
What is the result?
One second. I want to go to Glenn Ivey, then I want to go to Senator Nadal. Glenn?
I mean, the part about results, I think, is right. And part of the key is the sustained activity that you're talking about, Jeff. And I think part of that has to have political results. And in other words, you know, who becomes elected to be the prosecutor makes a difference. Who gets elected, who picks the chief of police makes a difference. So the sustained activity we need needs to carry over to next November and next November and next November. And we have to elect people who are going to make different choices, because it's not the law that prevented Wilson from being indicted here. It's the people who were running this process, the police chief and the prosecutor, who've been problems all the way through this, and they need to make a change politically in Ferguson.
Senator Nadal?
Yes, here's how I want to explain it, and I want to be very personable about it in my own experience. In Missouri, we have been reading from the same playbook from the white establishments for decades. We have been reading from the same playbook. We know exactly what someone like the governor is going to do. He's going to start appointing African Americans who should have been appointed a long time ago. We have systematic racism in state government. We have systematic racism in our own Democratic state party. And let me tell you, we have made changes. And the reason why is because there's a new playbook that we're reading that we have written actually, and it's called the Black Playbook. And so no longer can law enforcement or the status quo or the white establishment, no longer can they tell us what we are going to do as the oppressed. They now have to read from our playbook called the Black Playbook. And so that's how we have made a change, because they don't know what to do with the millennials. They don't know what to do with people like myself, because we're not succumbing to their playbook anymore. That playbook has now burned, and now they have to read from our playbook, and it's going to take decades for them to realize what we're doing and where we're going to go with this empowerment.
But I got to ask you this question, Senator Nadal, and this is one that I've looked at, and as someone who has literally studied movements and talked to movement leaders, whether it was the Black Freedom Movement, whether it was the Black Power movement, even where we are now. this also requires infrastructure. It also requires mobilization. It requires organization. I talk to young folks who talk about getting arrested. And I begin to ask, okay, but who have you identified as a lawyer who is going to be the one to go down to the jail to bail you out? Have you raised the funds as well? And so when you talk about this playbook, isn't it also critically important to teach the next gen, to teach millennials, and to that the infrastructure has to be in place for it to actually be a movement? Otherwise, it's sort of just folks just doing different things. There's no cohesion there.
You know, Roland, I got to tell you two things. First of all, I do think that you're right. We have multiple organizations that are on the ground doing certain things. In our phase one, we were just very angry, and we were exhibiting that anger in our protest. Phase two was the organization of different groups and people so that we can be better arranged in all of our dialogue. But I also have to tell you, at the same time, it's also a benefit. Liz Brown would tell you it's a benefit to have multiple organizations, because the establishment, the white establishment, doesn't know which head to cut off. And so that means that we will never stop. We are going to continue. Now, what is important is to understand our history in St. Louis. So I had to read back. In fact, I have a book that I'm reading right now going back to the Jefferson Bank protest, where you had elected officials who were in jail for months at a time, African Americans, and they were negotiating with the establishment. Obviously, it hasn't worked in 40 or 50 years because we're still dealing with the establishment. But like I said before, we have a new playbook now. It's called the Black Playbook, and we're going to continue to organize ourselves. And yes, we do need to teach the next group of people exactly what happened back in the day. But I also have to tell you, there from day one, there was a disconnect between those who were fighting in the movement in the 60s and the 70s and those who are the millennials right now. There is a disconnect. It was very evident in the very beginning, right, between the clergy and the young people.
All right, hold tight 1 second. I got to go to a break right now. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to bring in Yamiche Alcindor with you here today as well. So we're going to continue this, but also what I want to be focused on in the next 2 segments, what's next? We're having the conversation now. What's